One of the best parts about college football is that there are always new players and always new stars. One of the only downsides to college football is that there's so many names that it's hard to remember them all, and a lot of times you forget players no matter how good they were. In today's video, I want to continue my series where I literally pick 3 random former college football stars, talk about their careers, where they are now, and what went wrong for them. Today we have a couple of guys from the SEC, and then a former star Miami Hurricanes player, and I'm excited for this one. But before we can talk about these 3 players, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. I'll have a ton of college football content coming your way all season, and you're not going to miss out on any of that. If you want to support what I'm doing here, be sure to leave a like and a comment. It really helps, and it takes you very little time. Also, don't forget to turn on notifications, and now let's get started. So the first player I want to talk about is former Miami Hurricanes star Joseph Yearby. He was a former star running back for the Miami Hurricanes, and he obviously loved football from a young age. He eventually went to Miami Central High School, and he was joined by another running back at the time by the name of Dalvin Cook. That was the same high school as former Georgia star Willis McGahee, and I'm sure that you know Cook was pretty good as he's Florida State's all-time leading rusher. As they were both juniors at Miami Central High School, Dalvin rushed for 1,451 yards and Yearby rushed for 1,448 yards. They combined for 42 rushing touchdowns and caused problems for defenses, and both of them were insane. Yearby ran for 5,593 yards and 68 touchdowns in 4 years, and both him and Dalvin became 5-star running backs. I cannot recall how many times the high school backfield has had 2 5-stars, and if you know another example, please let me know down below. Between the two guys, scouts were split on who was better. Ultimately, a lot of them actually sided with Yearby, but as we all know, Cook became the better player. Yearby was a 5-star, and he actually originally pledged to Florida State. But after a coaching change, he'd reopen his recruitment. James Coley was the new offensive coordinator for Miami, and this resulted in him flipping to the Canes. This was a huge recruiting win for Al Golden at the time, as according to 24/7 Sports, Yearby was a 4-star recruit, the number 8 running back, and the 45th best player in the class of 2014. He had a lot of hype, but how would he do? Well, he impressed coaches early on, as he was a backup behind Duke Johnson. He would show out in his second career game, as he went for nearly 100 yards against Florida A&M, and then later had his first career touchdown against North Carolina. Combine that with a career game against Cincinnati, Yearby was showing the kind of potential that he had. The following year, he finished with 509 yards and 1 touchdown, and the Canes would lose to South Carolina in the Belk Bowl. 2015 would be a huge year, as in his first 4 games, he would combine for 424 yards and 4 touchdowns, and he was off to a blazing start. He would eventually cool down substantially though, as he never broke the 100-yard mark again, and the Canes only won 8 games. After going for 63 yards against Washington State in their bowl game, he became the 9th running back in school history to go for over 1,000 yards in one season. He finished 2015 with 1,002 yards and 6 touchdowns, while averaging 5 yards per carry. Unfortunately, he would not go to the NFL because he was seen as undersized and not good enough for the league, so he would come back. This proved to be a mistake as he lost the starting job to Mark Walton and even fell behind Gus Edwards. He only went for over 100 yards once on the season, and he's getting less than 10 carries a game. He became a huge what-if and sort of an afterthought, but despite being 3rd string, he still ran for nearly 600 yards and a career-high 7 touchdowns. He was solid, but he didn't have star numbers. He would announce that this would be his last game, and there were mixed feelings about what this meant. At the time, he actually had 2 kids, and he was 3rd on the depth chart, so he had to take advantage of his stock while he at least had some, but he could also come back and maybe improve it more. Gus Edwards had left for Rutgers, and he would have likely held off Travis Homer for that number 2 spot, but he decided to declare anyways. He'd go undrafted in the 2017 NFL Draft, but he would still get a chance with the team. He'd get a tryout with the 49ers, but was not signed by them. He then went to the Eagles, and that had the same exact result. As of now, I cannot find anything on social media or on the news about what he is up to, but he never made an NFL roster, and many Miami fans probably forget about him and consider him a huge what-if. I hope he has found major success in whatever he is doing now, and I definitely remember enjoying watching him in 2015 during his Miami career. Do you guys remember him? The second player we're going to talk about in today's video is former Mizzou star Crockett. He's been a journeyman NFL player over the last few years, but at one point, he looked like one of the next great running backs in college football. I'm not even joking. Going back in time, Crockett was born in the town of Magnolia, Arkansas, and he would spend his entire life playing football there. He attended Little Rock Christian Academy, and as a senior ran for 1,500 yards and 22 touchdowns. He was a pretty big deal on the recruiting scene, as he had a couple of big-time offers and decided to go out west to play for Boise State. He originally committed to the Broncos, and he probably would have put up big numbers while he was there. He was the first 4-star running back who had ever committed to Boise State, but when fellow recruit Micah Wilson flipped to Mizzou, Crockett decided to decommit and flip to the Tigers as well. I guess their relationship was extremely important, and Crockett could not turn down the opportunity to play in the SEC. I'm not quite sure what site listed him as a 4-star recruit, but according to 24/7 Sports, which I trust the most, he was ranked a 3-star recruit, the number 31 running back, and the 539th best player in the class of 2016. He'd go into Mizzou with decent expectations, but his freshman performance would blow away everyone. Crockett would quickly fly up the depth chart as he had his first touchdown against Eastern Michigan, then had 115 yards and 2 touchdowns against Delaware State. One game later, he began to go off. He had 145 yards on the road against Florida, 156 yards and 4 touchdowns against Middle Tennessee, 82 yards and a touchdown against South Carolina, 154 yards and a touchdown against Vanderbilt, and then 225 yards and a touchdown against Tennessee. In only about 6 games of starting, Crockett ran for 1,062 yards and 10 touchdowns. Everyone in the SEC was beginning to hype him up. He was praised as one of the next young stars in the Southeastern Conference, and he made Mizzou history. Crockett set Missouri freshman record for rushing yards, touchdowns, and single game yards. His numbers could have been even better, but he was arrested for the possession of marijuana for the final game. As a Mizzou fan, Crockett put me in awe, as I thought this guy was going to take over college football. 2017, though, would be a little bit disappointing. He'd go for over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns in his first game, but then after nearly 100 yards against South Carolina, he cooled off. Unfortunately, after only 6 games, he would hurt his shoulder, and he'd miss the remainder of the 2017 season. Mizzou started at 1-5 that year, but they had a miraculous 6-game win streak and ended up going to a bowl game, and Crockett was not a part of any of that. Going into 2018, a lot of people had somewhat forgotten about him, but he would try to put his name back on the map. His best game came against South Carolina, as he had 154 yards and a touchdown, and he also broke the century mark against both Florida and Vanderbilt, but he was still under the radar. He finished the 2018 campaign with 709 yards and 7 touchdowns, before he'd ultimately have to make a decision. He had battled both shoulder and ankle injuries during his time at Mizzou, and he decided it was time to go to the NFL. He declared for the 2019 NFL Draft, and while some thought he could be a late-round prospect, he ended up going undrafted. Ever since then, he's been a journeyman running back. He played a little bit for the Texans, Raiders, and Packers before he'd actually get an opportunity with the Broncos. He'd spent time on both the practice squad and the main roster, and going into this year, he looked like he was going to be the 3rd running back. Unfortunately, though, he tore his ACL a couple weeks ago, and this will end his 2022 campaign. Crockett is one of those stories of a player who was good but didn't live up to the potential. That was mainly due to injury, and it's unfortunate that he's not been able to make more of an impact in the NFL, but to SEC fans and Mizzou fans, this guy was a star. If you're a Bama or SEC fan, you definitely know who Tim Williams is, as he's regarded as one of the top pass rushers in both Alabama and SEC football history. The guy always had a knack of getting to the quarterback, and that was how it was from the very beginning. He grew up in the state of Louisiana, and eventually went to University Lab High School. They produce a ton of big-time athletes, and they're also known as a pipeline to LSU. It's literally located across the street from the LSU campus, so when he emerged as the #1 player in the state, it seemed like a lock he would go to LSU. For a while they had recruited him very hard, but then there was all these rumors of off-the-field issues and academic issues. The Tigers started to back off, but this didn't really make a whole lot of sense. During the Les Miles era, they had guys such as Jeremy Hill, Zach Mettenberger, and Darius Geis, who all got in serious trouble before they ever came to LSU. For the academic argument, LSU at the time was ranked lower than the other 3 main schools recruiting him. Those schools were Florida State, Miami, and Alabama, so if he could get into those schools, why couldn't he get into LSU? It was kind of puzzling, but overall, it just seemed LSU didn't want him. So what did Williams do? He opened up his options. He eventually took visits to those 3 schools and named Alabama the leader in his recruitment. He said they had been recruiting him since 9th grade and that he had a great relationship with the staff. He ended up visiting Tuscaloosa, fell in love with it, and committed a few days later. This was definitely tough for LSU fans, as they were annoyed that a top 5 player in the state was going to go play for Saban and that they couldn't pry him out of LSU's backyard. It was definitely an interesting scenario, and it seemed like a lot of people were rooting against him. This didn't really matter to Tim, though. According to 24/7 Sports, he was a 4-star recruit, the #2 weak side defensive end, and the 83rd best player in the class of 2013. He'd arrive at Alabama with some hype. In 2014, his role would increase a little bit as he finished with 1.5 sacks, Through 2 years, Williams hadn't done a whole lot, but he began to break out in 2015. During that season, he ended up with 19 tackles and 10.5 sacks. That's a pretty ridiculous stat line, as pretty much the only thing the guy did was rush the passer. This would somewhat be detrimental to his professional career, but at the time, they just told him, run at the quarterback and get him. He was pretty dang good at it, and he also became a little bit more well-rounded in 2016. He finished with 31 tackles, 2 pass deflections, and 9 sacks. He was never an all-conference selection, but he was still a pretty big deal in terms of his NFL draft potential. There were 2 issues though. He had some character problems while he was at Alabama. In late September of 2016, he was arrested by Alabama's police for carrying a pistol without a permit. This resulted in him being in Saban's doghouse, but he eventually got out of it, and of course put up big stats. The second knock against him is that the only thing he could do was pass rush. He wasn't really making a whole lot of tackles, he wasn't great against the run, and he was kind of in the mix between a linebacker and an edge rusher. This led some people to be very skeptical of his transition to the NFL, but either way, there was going to be a team that took a chance on him because of how good of a pass rusher he was. He ended up being selected with the 78th overall pick by the Baltimore Ravens. There was obviously a lot of hype for him when he came in, but he ended up pretty much doing nothing. He played in 8 games and only had 6 total tackles, and in 2018 he had a career-high 10 tackles, but he was also battling injuries, and by the time the 2019 season rolled around, he was already out of the NFL. In 4 years, he played 20 games and had 18 tackles and 2 sacks. For a guy who was an elite edge rusher in college, he didn't really do a whole lot in the NFL. Some say he was doomed to fail from the beginning, but others say he never got his shot. If you're a Bama or a Ravens fan, what do you think? Overall, I really enjoyed Tim Williams, and if you want to see a full documentary on his career, check out the link I'll leave down in the description below. So yes, that wraps up today's video. Let me know your thoughts down below. Do you remember these players? Who is another star we could take a look at next? And what topic should I cover in my next video? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support the channel, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.